Well, hello, lovelies. Um, so I was going to talk about yeah, I just prefer the company of animals over people, but I'm here to help you people out. Um, so yeah, I agree with most of the stuff. I don't agree with the shit picking, and is what I would consider it. Odd relationships that people might have. Again, you had me on board with most of the stuff. Go after the non-consenting stuff and the people being forced into sex trafficking. When it comes to the consenting stuff, I don't like to be too judgmental. It seems to be a huge misdirection made by the pedophiles themselves. So you don't look deeper and you think this is the worst stuff. But when this all comes to light, and the really dark stuff that people are starting to touch on in the Epstein files, is finally understood, you might better understand, my position, and there's all sorts of weird relationships with almost adults and young adults that I just don't care about. I just, there's other shit. You got enough problems. You have a huge amount of problems. You don't need to make it bigger. How about we make it smaller? And that's what I did in my mind. Is I made the problem a bit smaller. Um, I'm not going to. What about a 17 and 23-year-old? Oh my God! What the you just there's other shit. You should dig deeper in the fucking barrel, please and thank you. I deal with being raped and whatnot. Last one was November 20th. They do that targeted individual stuff so someone could spew some gas in my fucking place because all this shit is like eyes wide shutty around my fucking apartment. But the child predators and the protectors all seem to be involved. I'm Michael Jackson hardcore, so I understand what that dude went through. And but I don't have I have the fame, but it's like a secret occult fame. So I have the fame, but yet I don't. It's weird. And there, I was watching Terror Ted Tales, and they were touching on the Eyes Wide Shut movie, and there was a couple scenes in that movie that were like questionable. One really questionable. I mean, but there was the one dude's teenage daughter and the two adults, and the one in Terror Ted Tales, they were like, yeah, he sold his daughter into it, and it's just why isn't the possibility that it's just a demonic family with a demon daughter that just wants to fuck around? And the other more questionable scene in it was at the end where the two guys walked off with, Nicole Kidman and Tom Cruise's daughter, because they sold their daughter, and that, is probably what y'all should focus on. But then in the other case, if the teenager did get sold, which is an interesting aspect I have been recently contemplating, then that duh, you shouldn't do that. But there's all sorts of weird relationships out there. Again, with the Jimmy Doran 2024 was talking about that one sperm donor doctor that provided his own sperm to thousands of people, thinking they would be getting some other sperm and not the doctor's personal sperm. And then this brother and sister couple ended up hooking up, never knowing they were brother and sister. And the Freemasons and the fucking, people going too far with their judgments, fucking, I think ruined a good relationship. Like, what the fuck ever. I guess it happens. There's billions of you running around here. And, they were socially shamed into separating, even though they probably still love each other, and it's not the most ideal relationship, but like, it happened. And there, I don't want to be too judgmental. You got me on board with a lot of it, but I really kind of, because I deal with the Michael Jackson stuff. So I kind of just, Jackson took a different approach. I guess he had money to do that. I don't really, the Freemasons and the cults keep me from that, which I'm sure has some negative karmic meta consequences. I do have helpers too, so not talking about those. There's like two groups, and then there's like a third, special group. But yeah, just some of the child protectors, I think, get easily misled, and you end up working for the child predators because they're just so amazingly manipulative. And another thing is I'm a really honest, authentic guy, and I shoot it to people straight, whether they like it or not. And I have a hard time with eye contact, though. You know, and I think people are like, well, that's because you lying. You're looking off to the left. What does that mean? You're looking off to the right. What does that mean? And it's like, I don't know. I was just abused and bullied and picked on a lot, and that's probably something that I had developed, throughout the years of being abused by others in horrific ways. Like people, think some of the Epstein stuff is bad, and that's bad. But wait until you get into the people trying to make like mass shooters or monsters and all sorts of shit. And sucking my adrenochrome when I'm a fucking child at like 2 or 3 years old. I've been through all that stuff, and I'm glad that it's coming more to light now. But my squirrels and birds that I feed on my balcony, they don't pull that shit. My cats. I got this one cat here. Look, yeah, yeah, Kiki. Yeah, she don't do that shit. And there's aspects, to my particular disclosure that will make sense, and I'm trying to get around to it. I'm hung up on a book right now. I really could use some help with the beginning of it, or some, I don't even know if it's like encouragement or motivation, but just someone that's not looking to taint it to help me along would be really fucking helpful. And I was thinking about a podcast, and then I'm thinking about it more, and I just don't want to plug people into the matrix, so I'm just like making these like videos from time to time. you know I know word travels through the grapevine, even though it looks like no one really watches my videos, but word travels through the grapevine. And yeah, I just don't like shit picking relationships. They could be, traumatized, roofie possessed like I was. I don't know any of their fucking history. It seemed like that one couple, that the brother and sister couple, the good Cersei and Jaime Lannister, like I just don't want to be. I'm not judging that. It wasn't their fault. It was the doctor's fault. And then when some of this possession stuff comes more to light, actually, we're all going to have to take a look back at those fucking true crimes. Where people were like, the perpetrator was like, it was like I was possessed. And it's like, yeah, you're upset at that one, but like maybe you should be upset at the person or persons that roofie possessed them, very likely. What happened to me when I was a child by a Jesuit family posing, or, not posing, as a Catholic family. And then there was the Notre Dame church school that I went to, Notre Dame school. I had a church there. And I had a couple roofie recalls in the church there, where I'm surrounded by many different classmates that weren't even of my class, but some were. I remember Larry was there. And then there was another time where I was in the kind of attic area where they have the choir sing. There, it's like above the front entrance of this Notre Dame school in Clarendon Hills, Illinois. And I was probably there the second time because I had woke and seen people, like I could say Larry was there during one of my, possessions. And so that's like the Catholic Church gets a lot of protection from the government because they go around and they make monsters. The monsters of your world makes monsters so they could cosplay Hero. And things, as simple as things here are on Earth, things can be complicated also. And yeah, so you have me on board with like 90-ish% of your shit. I mean, your legitimate, complaints and everything. I just don't like, going too far and being too judgmental. Yeah, you got laws and blah 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 blah. Laws that pretty much like harm most of you, covertly. Wow. And so when you get into these weird situations, like Candace was like a 15 and 25-year-old or a 17 and 23-year-old, it just seems to me that that's a family affair. At that point, it's just a family affair. Family fine with it, then whatever. You should move on to other fucking issues instead of always, being so hating on your neighbor and shit. So yeah, and on top of I had a neighbor upset maybe because she crashed a car, and then she had like bioweapon my cat, which I'm pretty sure us targeted individuals go through that shit. So it's like, I get raped constantly. No one really does anything about it. I'm really kept a lot, from money, in legit ways. I was, sent to jail, stuff I never did, multiple times. Took a deal once, so I couldn't do anything then. Got acquitted the other time, and it was like almost a full year in jail without any adjudication of guilt. And I'm like, I'm on a suit. And then, these cults, Freemasons and whatnot go around and they're like, don't take his case, don't help him out. And it's like, and then I can't help out the community, in the ways that I want to. I'm not going to be like, some grocery bagger. Or, yeah, I do appreciate the grocery store workers, very much. But my purpose here on this planet is bigger than that. And people always just, like people would think that you wouldn't attack a Jesus character if it appeared in your world, but you would be tricked into it. You would have your emotions, like I'm more upset about the dead children that I saw on Twitter than I am more so about the CP, you know and people be like, fuck you. And it's like, well, yeah, you one, the child lives, the other, the child's dead. Which one is worse? Please tell me. Someone debate me on this. And then so it's meant to like stir people's emotions and parents and whatnot. And when your emotions are stirred, you're more easily manipulated, is what that is. But I'm glad all this stuff has come to light, and people that have been talking about this stuff for a very long time have been getting vindicated. Totally, total and utter vindication. So that's good. And then I need to talk about my aspect of it too, where I have shit to say about the child protectors and the child predators. And some people don't like that. Some people like rate me, because of it, and whatnot. Other, shitty judgments that brings bad karma down upon them, and whatever. I just going to keep on going. I just don't know. Like, I was wanting to do the whole president thing, and then there's secret requirements to eat and fuck children. And then I'm like, okay, well, I guess, I'm not going to do that. So, I've just been readjusting to it. I really feel that you guys do need a good steward of America. But, I don't know. Sometimes, Some people, could just get to me, and it's like, man, they give me these nice. I have some nice things. I have some nice perks and benefits and everything. But then they keep me from what's like a year in jail without any adjudication of guilt, and it was actually like worse being in county jail than DOC is what the many of the inmates said, and so it was even worse conditions. They keep me from that. I flew off a Lime scooter a couple years ago into a broken toe, and they covered that up. Keep me from this lawsuit, keep me from that lawsuit, keep me from this and that, and they'll go around. I'll call lawyers everywhere, right? Because I have the spy network up my ass. So and they'll get every single lawyer to be like, it's not that you don't have a case, it's just that we're not going to take it. And so you keep me from large sums of money where I could help out others, but you keep me from that because it's about making an image, making someone seem like something, and that's what Jackson went through, hardcore. But he was a court jester for a while until he took his power back, and during that time he made a vast sum of money, and good for him. And I think the dude's still alive. I think he faked his death. You know, and they tried pulling that will shit. They tried pulling that will shit so they could try to find out where Jackson was. I'm pretty sure that was one of the tactics. I think Jackson is still alive. He just, did some facial surgery and was like, "Look, I'm in retirement. I'm tired of this shit." And I totally get that shit too. I really do. Something that they probably did to Jackson that they did to me, is they'll constantly get their children to like feel themselves up around me. Now Denver has been kind of sort of nice around about that, but other cities where I used to live, so the community is like roofie raping me with their children into my adulthood. Maybe photos were taken because I'm roofied and I don't know what's occurring. So anyway, and then you'd possess me too, and then you just do everything you can to oh yeah, you'd get your children dressed like sluts. Like why is there like a 14, 15-year-old girl at the food pantry that I'm going to wearing a see-through skirt dressed like a Friday night slut? Like straight up see-through. It was clear see-through. It wasn't like no pink or some other color. It was just clear see-through. It's like why? It's because I'm dealing with the sex traffickers and the child protectors, and both of them, for different reasons, could look like assholes to me. And I'm going to talk about it. You know, and yeah, does I say that I would probably raise my kids to be like Candace Owens' family or Tucker Carlson, but if they're getting their children to dress like Sunday school girl sluts and having themselves feel themselves up around adults for the protection of children, it is so. Why don't you teach your kids to feel themselves up around each other? It's so ass backwards. It's so ass backwards, and they're like, no, 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 this is like some standard stuff that you do. Shut the fuck up with that shit. So I got, and in this sense, I don't satisfy any of the groups. But I mean, I'm on board with like 90-ish% of their stuff. They have legit complaints. People are eating, children, forcing them into this stuff. It comes when it comes to the weird consensual stuff when they're older. You would say, well, 18 is the standard that we used here, and that's fine. I guess you guys are getting poisoned. You guys are getting poisoned so much, and you don't even know how to properly, give nutrition to your children, that they are delayed in their development. But anyway, because that's how some of the ones at the top like it. They're like, we keep them just a little bit, not as matured for a little bit longer. Then that's a win for us, and it's really fucked up. There's a lot of fucking problems, and I'm just, in my mind, I'm like, okay, well, some weird sexual shenanigans that I'm not trying to participate in. Whatever, it seems like it's a family matter. You guys should focus on the non-consenting, being forced, people being eaten, like specifically children. But there's also adults that get eaten too. So, there's like whistleblower females that, like, oh my God, they're eating people at this party. And then she was never seen again. And what do you think they did to her? They very likely ate her. So maybe you guys should focus on those things. Just a thought. Throw a little less shit everywhere, and not be so judgmental. I am, and I'm in that group there at least. So there's these weird, odd relationships that everybody wants me to fucking, comment on or something. Not everybody, but I get a poke on Twitter every now and then, like, what about this? What about that? What about this? And it's like, oh my God, it's like an almost adult with a young adult. It seems kind of normal, actually. Did they grow up together? Do they have some social connection? How are their families? I don't know any of that shit. On top of all the trauma behind it. And they could be sexually erring. There was because I get roofie raped by mostly children, but also adults, I guess, for life. Like my family, tried selling me or some bullshit. So yeah, and then nobody does anything about it. The crime, endless crimes on me and shit. So I'm handling it well. And people try to justify it, but it's just not justifiable. They have their stupid bullshit eye for an eye thing that they totally get wrong most of the time. So yeah. I just kind of, prefer the animals and everything over other humans for these reasons that I really said in this video. My little kitty, she don't pull no bullshit. She's not like feeling herself up around me after her and her brother fucking roofied me and raped me or some shit. Some really extreme shit and just, endless crimes. At least like Virginia Giuffre fucking got money, you know. I didn't get any money out of this, and they keep me again from these lawsuits that can have, but I don't know their demonic fucking legalese, so I need help, and I'm like, yeah, I'll find a lawyer that will work contingency, and lo and behold, they fucking get they shit on the Constitution pretty much because that's part of Constitution being financially compensated for injuries and whatnot, and they would go around and get lawyers to not take my case, all unprovable stuff, because that's how they operate, very unprovable things. And then they go around slandering people, again, hard to prove, but, it's something that they do. And they go around slandering people, and like they did with Michael Jackson. Even Jackson had a lot of money, but, they still did that to him, didn't they? And I have even less resources than Jackson does. So, and they do this on a mass scale. They're like, look, let's just molest a lot of children, and some of them are going to grow up, but like we got to get our children to like feel themselves up around them and do all sorts of inappropriate things to them for life. And eventually, a certain percentage of them will fuck up, and then that's how we misdirect the mob. We misdirect the mob from us that are eating and fucking children to those people that we fucking, were working on like a fucking garden, as a child into their adulthood. Yeah, and that's why the Catholic Church, like nothing happens to the Catholic Church. They do this on a mass scale, and they do this gang stalking stuff to children. They do this gang stalking stuff that you hear, the targeted individual stuff. They do it to children. And then they let the children go off. Like, for example, like the mass shooters, they get targeted hard, and so all that targeted individual stuff you hear about adults, they do that shit in your schools. to your children, and then they'll deny it. They'll be like, "Oh, it's just crazy, just crazy." Who would do that? Who would do that? I don't. I think people are starting to catch on who would do that. And so yeah, everyone thinks, sunshine and rainbows, and oh my God, that's the worst stuff ever. How could you say that, Chris? And it's like, man, that is like some of the least worst stuff ever. Especially what some weird age, that people deem as somehow bad or whatever. I just don't want to be too judgmental. I don't know their history, and it seems to be used as a tool of distraction because you got to give the mob something. You got to give the mob something. And so what they do, they're like, great, let's just molest a whole bunch, and then we're going to target them for life, and then we're going to get some of them to air, and that's how we feed the mob. And I don't want to play that game either. So, because then you end up being a tool of the pedophiles themselves. I do appreciate how people, start saying PDF file instead of pedophiles because then you're manifesting it less. And there are some of them that are actually helping you out. So I don't know about burning everyone at the stake. It almost seems like those court cases where they need some of the lower level ones to go after the bigger ones, and then you take it easy on the lower level ones and you go after the big ones, And it seems like it's that sort of situation. So yeah, I talk about anything really, and that's what I do. So anyway, I hate all this complication and stuff. Man, company of my cats is much better. Although I kind of need another human in my life, but I don't know. Like, are they going to be an Erica Kirk or some fucking, wound up fucking child protector that's looking in the wrong yard? I don't know. I need to watch it. I was going to go to these meetup things and try to make a good connection, but we'll see. There's all sorts of bullshit shenanigans. People needlessly bringing their daughters around me and shit. Just stupid stuff. Stupid stuff. I went to this one shroom meetup and everything, and he'll bring his 13-year-old daughter. I ended up like barking at him. I'm like, why don't you fucking, give your daughter to Baal or Moloch? I'm just anyway. I don't know. Maybe he wasn't involved, but he immediately, responded with, "You're crazy. You should get some help." And who says that? The traffickers always fucking say that shit. They pivot to that. They've been doing that for a really long time. That's how they got rid of the old world. Is people, that they remembered the old world. They'll throw in insane asylums and torture them. And then there's a bunch of ghost hunters that go around torturing and annoying the ghosts and everything. They're like, man, I've been through, the ghosts have been through some shit. And nobody remembers the old world like they do. And then some jerk offs come in there and be like, are you there? Are you there? And asking stupid questions, just fucking annoying them. Just, wow. Maybe some you ghost hunters could go around fucking ask the spirits about the old world, and if they remember Tartaria. And sorry that happened to them because they were used. Those insane asylums were used to silence people. That's why they're so horrific, because they were designed to be horrific. And they're like, we shocked people and gave them lobotomies and all sorts of blah, 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 blah. And it's like, yeah, because they were telling the truth about things. And they might have even had some psychic powers or some real magic that, those powers that be, like, in the 1800s into the 1900s that built these places, or repurposed places into insane asylums. Yeah, that's what they did, is they tortured people, so they always pivot. I saw that bitch, that female Pam Bondi, just immediately pivot to that constantly when she was being questioned. You're crazy. You're crazy. And then all these people, it's coming more to light. That's actually one of the number one fucking go tos is you're crazy. You're crazy. When you're onto stuff. And the other side covering stuff up, they pivot to you're crazy. You're crazy. But it's starting to not work anymore. Like an old magic spell that people have finally called on to. And so that's good. So I think, when the dust is settled and everybody actually sees the scope of things, they're going to be like, maybe not on my side, but not like against me either. They're like, okay, well, Chris has some weird opinions. It's like, yeah, I don't want to be too judgmental. Everyone, tossing things my way, especially like a year or two ago on Twitter. And it's like they want me to judge and everything. Sometimes, it's like somehow when you're 18, you could date anyone your age, at any age. Somehow that's okay. But then someone that's almost that age, they can't date someone a few years out of their fucking, or several years, out of their age range. I just, I don't get that, you know. So people try to, I think do the right thing, but they could be misdirected very easily. And I have a high annoyance and dislike of very evil things that are done to me, even just recently and kind of constantly to me. And so I could be harsher than most, or and a lot of other people. So I am harsh to the protectors and the predators, because I think they all do dickish things, some without realizing it, and some totally knowing it. So you decide which groups those are. But anyway, I am done here ranting. You people have a lovely day and peace the fuck out.